we hear a lot of noise about how cows are contributing to global warming, which is an idea that's really struck me as rather specious right from the beginning, because like the buffalo did that too. Like I see, so huge herds of grazing animals are bad for the planet. That strikes me as highly unlikely. So, and I know they talk about methane, but people talk about a lot of things. Now, you said that you regenerated the ground with the cattle and with the careful management of grass, and now you're producing, say, a foot of topsoil on top of this rock. I presume that's also a carbon sink.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Right, because plants take in carbon because they're like made out of carbon. And
right. In fact, when we want to look at that, in 1961, the first soil test that we took, we averaged about 1% organic matter. Organic matter is a kissing cousin to carbon. Organic matter is something
right, because carbon is life-based. Life is carbon-based.
Right. And so organic matter is something that was living at one time, and now it's in some state of decomposition in the soil. It's what gives soil its porosity, its bounce, it's
what segregates it from sand or dust.
Yes, or even clay.
Right.
And so 1%. Today, we're a little over 8%. So all it would take, I mean, if you want to talk climate change, atmospheric carbon, all it would take is all of our farmland to change 1% in organic matter, and we would return to pre-1960 atmospheric carbon level.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's really struck me as incomprehensible about the carbon debate is, so I know, for example, that over the last 30 years, something like that, the planet has greened quite radically, especially in semi-arid areas. And that seems to be a consequence of increased atmospheric carbon dioxide, some of which is arguably human-made. But the net consequence of that, it's so interesting to see, is immense greening.
Sure.
It's something like 20% of the Earth's area, which is like, that's a lot. And the fact that it's in semi-arid areas means that exactly the desert-like areas that were supposed to expand, according to the climate doomsayers, have actually shrunk. And I've been thinking that through. Again, more recently, I talked to Patrick Moore, for example, and he was one of the founders of Greenpeace. And Moore has produced these, he's not the only one, but he's produced these graphs of carbon dioxide levels across like 500 million years instead of 250.
Right.
And we're definitely at a carbon dioxide low.
Yeah.
And so if we tap it up even a little bit, it makes a big difference. But that's all to say that plants like carbon dioxide a lot.
They do.
And then when there's more of it, they grow and sequester it, and they do that rapidly. And then I read a paper here recently that indicated that the typical climate model underestimates the rapidity at which plants utilize carbon dioxide by 30%, which is like a fairly large margin of error. And so it just seems to me to be self-evident that if we set the preconditions, plants would mop up any excess carbon dioxide in like no time flat. And so you're saying that if we improved even our grazing habits so that grass was allowed to grow longer before it was grazed on, you don't need much of a percentage in how effective the plants sequester carbon to take whatever excess carbon there is.
That's exactly right. And as pastures, as perennials, and of course, a lot of North America was a prairie. Okay, that's a perennial prairie, as opposed to an annual, which is corn, crops, and soybeans, and annual crop. Okay, in a healthy perennial.
So you don't have to plant perennials; they just grow year after year.
That's right. So in a perennial prairie situation, pasture situation, if it's healthy, there's enough methanotrophic bacteria. This is a special kind of freestanding bacteria, methanotrophic bacteria, and like its name suggests, it's there to pull down methane. There's enough there to metabolize into the soil bank the methane released from 1,000 cows per acre. Well, you're never going to have 1,000 cows per acre. So
where do these ideas come from then? Given because we hear follow the science all the time, but then if you look into the science, first of all, there's a plethora of opinions, right? At minimum, and just now and then, when you're looking at data, you kind of have to stand back and use your head a bit. And you start from maybe the presumption that any idea that large grazing herds are bad for the planet is to be regarded with extreme skepticism to begin with, because large grazing herds are exactly the sorts of things that the environmental types worship when they're happening naturally in Africa. So you can't have it both ways.
That's right.
And so I've just always thought the idea that pastured animals, properly pastured, being bad for the planet somehow, and that's as bad as equating factory farming with regenerative farming, for example, because they're not the same thing at all.
No,
okay, so your experience on the farm was that carefully managed grazing herds regenerated soil that, well, not even soil, they actually made rocky areas into soil that could then be, well, first of all, a carbon sink, if you care about such things, but also productive grazing land.
Yes.
And a big part of the trick there is to manage the grass properly and to move the cattle.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we began adding the other species. So you've got the cattle, and so we look around. So Jordan, a lot of what developed here was in the mid '60s. Dad looked around and he said, "Well, 10-10-10 chemical fertilizer doesn't build soil. All right, what does build soil? What makes regeneration happen?" And it's very simple. There is no animal-less ecology, so you got to have animals. Well, what about these animals? Well, they move. Well, if they move, then we have to give them shelter, water, and control. And so all of our innovations that we're now famous for grew out of not. We didn't sit around in a focus group saying, how can we innovate? It was strictly, how does nature work? So how do we mimic that on a domestic scale? That was all. We don't have.
So you're basically mimicking migration.
Mimicking the choreography. We call this mob stalking, herbivorous, solar conversion, lignified carbon, sequestration, fertilization. And I knew you would enjoy that.
Yeah. Say that again.
And I did practice that in front of the mirror.
Let's hear it again.
Mob stalking, herbivorous, solar conversion, lignified carbon, sequestration.
Oh, yes. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. Right. Well, that sounds plenty scientific.
Plenty scientific.
Yeah.
So then we say, how does this maintain sanitation? You got all this manure and urine and stuff. And birds follow herbivores. So we built egg mobiles for laying chickens, and they follow the cow herd. The chickens scratch through the cow pies, eat out the fly larvae, scratch the cow patties into the ground, stimulating the fertility, eating the grasshoppers and crickets that compete with the cows for the vegetation. And instead of where most farmers would shoot.
So the chickens chase the cows. Are they moved too?
Yes. So they're in egg mobiles. That's what we call them, egg mobiles.
Okay. So the chickens follow the cattle, and you move the chickens as well.
Yeah, so like the egret on the rhino's nose. I mean, look at any herd, wildebeest in nature, and you'll see these flocks of birds following, and they're the sanitizers with the herbivores. So instead of shooting the cows up with parasiticides and grubicides and things like that, we just collect $100,000 worth of eggs as a byproduct of the pasture sanitation program and the fertility program. So this then allows.
So why sanitation exactly? Delve into that a bit more, because while the cows are manuring the land as they graze, and the sanitation problem, it doesn't decompose rapidly enough without the birds. Like what exact role do the birds play?
I mean, there are dung beetles, but the sanitation is that the manure is what carries the cattle parasites. That's where the parasites live and propagate to reinfect the cows when they come back through. So when the cows scatter them, the sun and now not having enough of a pie to procreate in, to live in.
I see.
Then they don't live for another day.
So you move the cattle for two reasons then, actually. One is to allow the grass to maximize in terms of density, but also to allow the land to clean, so that when the cows come back, they're eating grass, rather than their own waste products.
That's right.